I was very shocked because, you know, the instances that rock your world, you know, tend to happen to you when you're younger. You know, the first time I saw, you know, when I was taken to the Apollo Theater by the black caretaker of my father's synagogue in '64, and saw Jackie Wilson at the Apollo. I mean, that just rocked my world, you know. What really surprised me was that happened to me so much later in life when Bambaataa invited me to the T-Connection in 1980. And, you know, as you say, you know, the electricity was so palpable, you know. The vibe was so ferocious, you know. And I think what DJs, you know, it would be useful for them to know. You could, if they care about, you know, the history of DJing, was when to see Bambaataa play, and you know, just the progression of coming to the club and setting up and all this was very post-gang. Okay, this is not you know, a DJ with, you know, coming with a computer, you know, an old Serato or whatever, you know, 8 ounces worth of equipment.
Yeah.
When, you know, Bambaataa came to the gig, there were like 4 men carrying crates behind them. It had the quality of gang members coming to rumble, you know. It really was ferocious, you know. And I was very impressed that, you know, something that had happened at a time in life where, you know, you're in your 30s already and you believe you're past the point of having something so exciting happen to you. You know, to know that could still happen was just, you know, wonderful. Well, working with the Cold Crush, I had the benefit of working with Grandmaster Caz. And because he was so literate, you know, by any standard, you know, he was, you know, literate by the standards of Western literature.
Yeah.
You know, that was always something to hook onto that could get you through. I mean, I'm going through the same thing, trying to hang in there with a 2-minute Mongo Santa Maria solo. You know, then it was, you know, why is this music so radically different? You know, but I'm also, just to toot my own horn, with records like Fresh Wild Fly and Bold by the Cold Crush Brothers and Punk Rock Rap by the Cold Crush Brothers, I believe that I have, you know, they say video killed the radio star and, you know, film killed vaudeville. You know, I believe that I have, you know, I mean, the only examples, you know, of something that was live, even though it was in the studio, something whose form had yet to be codified. And you got to remember that the Bronx and Harlem, even though, you know, in some respects they were worlds apart culturally by the time the late 70s happened, okay, because Harlem was a community and the Bronx was burnt out. But they were geographically very close to each other. So what happened was you had hip hop evolve like a weed, like Topsy, something, you know, like Marlboro country, you know? And then, bang, the Harlem record guys take over, you know? You had Spoonie Gee, who was like really an R&B guy who was rapping instead of singing, you know? You have the codification, that you have this truncating of what hip-hop was into the constraints of, you know, the Harlem record business, you know? So, and with these Cold Crush records, you know, I'm telling you something other than what you're telling me. You know, you're telling me that live performances give you a sense that records don't, that records were too late to give you. And I'm saying I actually have a couple of the records that reflect, what hip hop was before there was before it was a record business.
Right.
This crazy, formless, sprawling, kind of music that was, so it really, the South Bronx's proximity to, it's like a Philip Roth novel about like what would have happened if Hitler, won the war. You wonder sometimes what would have happened to hip hop, had the Bronx not been so close to Harlem, and was so quickly, engulfed, by the vastly deeper traditions of Harlem.
So Spoonie Gee, he's definitely been a very interesting figure, as far as because obviously when he did The Godfather, he hadn't really put out a record for a minute, so that was like a comeback of sorts. So
how well I know that, because when we put it out, it wasn't selling. We weren't getting orders for it, and I finally went to one of the important retailers, Music Factory, and I said, this record's, getting all kinds of rotation. Why am I not getting orders? And then I said to me, oh, we thought it was the new Rakim record. So, Spoonie had been quiet for so long, and Rakim had become very popular, having been influenced by Spoonie. But there's a big story about Teddy Riley in those days. He was almost like the property of a big drug dealer,
Right.
In a manner of speaking, And he was, I don't even know if he was 18, He was just, a young, brilliant kid, We made those records in his mother's living room, You didn't have to be in the middle of something that was going viral, to know how important Teddy Riley was at that time. I think, in fact, it was a piece on Teddy Riley in the Village Voice that got Barry Michael Cooper his entree to Hollywood. The legendary piece. Might as well tell the story now. He was tied, if you will, to a gangsta. And it's I feel ambivalent about this because I don't want to go so far as to say some of my best friends are gangster, but you don't look. Heard the American expression, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth?
Sure. Yep.
Well, Gene Griffin and I were peas in a pod. We both had associated labels deals at CBS, and there was a uniformity of bad experience to people who had those kinds of labels, because at that time they were a division of Epic, and at that time Michael Jackson was having his hugest success, with Epic, with the Thriller album, and so everybody else who was there was lower in the pecking order, and then there was this Associated Labels division, which was lower still. He had Sound of New York, I had Tuff City, so we kind of became, like we were both in. It's like we were both in the same program together,
Yep.
And so we had a kind of a friendship. And a few years later, he was out of town. I don't know if he'd been locked up or something, but we had a deal with Teddy, and then decided not to make the record, and he was going to wait for Gene to come back, and nobody wanted to do anything until Gene came back, for fear of the consequences, And when Gene came back, he made Teddy make my records.
Okay.
Okay, because we had been in this awful situation together, you know.
Talking about the Take It Off record, which is featured the kind of go-go rhythm in there.
You know, that sort of go-go sound paralleled the rise of Teddy Riley's swing beat. And, you know, you know, my A&R chops for hip-hop at that time, you know, was as sharp as they ever were and were going to be, you know. I was breathing it, you know, and I just went over it. What happened was I had this deal with Marley where I pay him part cash and part vinyl, you know, because I kind of had a deeper command of, you know, vintage funk and, you know, crate digging stuff. He was a brilliant guy, but he wasn't really a crate digger. You know?
It was more, that's why he called himself the engineer all-star, because he was more of it, wasn't he, like
Yeah.
technical? Yeah.
And Queensbridge, I don't know when the Queensbridge projects were built, but you know, it didn't have the old bones, you know, of some of the other black neighborhoods in Metro New York, you know, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Harlem. So I actually was schooling him as far as like the deeper crate digging funk type things. So we had a reasonably fair exchange, and you know, I'd bring some of the records would be sampled, and you know, but it was like the consecutive A&R calls that I had made with Take It Off and then The Godfather. With Take It Off was let's take Spoonie swing, you know, and of course you couldn't really. Nobody at that time was really spot on imitating Teddy Riley, you know. And for the Godfather, it's let's take Spoonie James Brown. So these were all, you know, trends at the time.
Yep.
And it worked out well. You know, I gave him Impeach the President, and he was a sponge. He was a complete sponge. If I gave him a record, it was integrated into what he was doing immediately. You know, I give him an an early Ohio Players record, and you know, Junie Morrison's Granny persona, and all of a sudden, you know, Marley had a Granny persona on WBLS. You know, I gave him Impeach the President, and it became MC Shan's The Bridge. If you hear the opening, it goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got MC Shan in the house." You know, it's the takeoff like, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got the Honey Drippers in the house." What I saw time and again in those days, okay, what was that there were fewer beat makers, guys with studio chops, than there were rappers, and you know, as we discussed with the 45 King, what you would see was these posses of rappers just coalesced around them. You know, artist after artist would come around them, and it was pretty thrilling to see that with Marley.
Yep.
You know, I mean, starting from his just grabbing whoever he could, you know, in Queensbridge, to just people seeking him out from an ever wider swath of New York. But
So,
you know, you could never go wrong working in Queensbridge. It was a real hotbed of talent.
and what some of those like 12 inches he did with Hot Day, like the master mix and those kind of things. How did those come about? Because they sound like they were just recorded at like a party. There was a couple, like there was one with Tragedy on there, and one with
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, the reason I was working in Queensbridge was because I was living in Long Island City, you know, and I mean, even though it was the Sticks, but I was near a studio, power play. I was near a pressing plant, Apex, and I was near the Triborough Bridge. So, you know, you could go into the studio on Tuesday, know, have your records pressed by Friday and just, you know, hit the street, you know, and just run around New York, you know, on payday, you know, where there were record stores in every borough, you know, and it was like being in the baked goods business. You'd come into the pressing plant in the morning, and the smell of vinyl would just fill your nostrils. You know, it's like being in a bread company. You know, and, you have fresh vinyl, man. That Hot Day record, you know, was pretty lo-fi, and what he did was he recorded, you know, who it was a tragedy over Take It Off.
Yeah.
And it was like, you know, dude, that record is now mine, you know.
Uncut, baby. What?